Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 12.19, the Kaiser. We are back.
Yes, let's just jump straight into it. Deep below Bone Heaven, beneath even the laboratories and secret places, there was a nest. The Tyrant Lizard King had once been called the King of the Paleo Beasts. According to the gene tyrant that had recreated it, the beast had been a relentless and ferocious predator, capable of overcoming nearly any obstacle and devouring nearly any prey. Before it, nearly all other organisms were fodder. The bones of countless tyrant lizard kings lay discarded around the nest, each cleanly stripped of meat. The beast that resided in this quiet place had taken a liking to them. They offered the ideal nutrition and taste for its ancient palate. Yes, the tyrant lizard king could overcome nearly any obstacle, devour nearly any prey. The purpose of this nest's occupant, the final creation of the gene tyrant Tyros, had been to eliminate that nearly. It was a species of one, able to endlessly evolve and adapt to conquer any foe. The paleo beast perfected. No, if you asked its creator, it was life perfected. So basically another gene tyrant?
Not so much. It's like SCP-682, I think.
It was called the Kaiser. The nest shifted and the beast emerged. It moved on all fours, arms and legs muscular and long, but it could shift to a bipedal stance if it felt the need. Its head was covered in spines and scales, but no eyes. There was no need for eyes. It had already developed far more efficient ways to perceive the world around it. It parted its lips slightly, revealing rows upon rows of tightly packed, razor-sharp teeth. A barbed tongue tasted the air. Something had caught the interest of the Kaiser. As it continued to move, the nest shifted, and the piles of bones slid down the edges of the hill. Not all of this matter belonged to the Kaiser's prey. Most of it actually belonged to the Kaiser himself. When it shifted from taking on new traits to survive, it often shed skin, bones, and muscles as required. Once, this had been incredibly painful, but the Kaiser had long since adapted to the pain. Emerging fully from the pile of the past, the Kaiser rose to 2 feet, snout pointed upwards towards the roof of the cavern. It did not sniff, it did not search. It had already spotted exactly what it was looking for. The Kaiser had been given one directive, one purpose, one biological imperative that its blood screamed for. Overcome obstacles. The greatest of obstacles had presented itself. It would be a mistake to say that the Kaiser was happy. Its brain did not possess the capacity for such emotions, and if it did, they would swiftly have been adapted away. But all the same, the light shifted, and the Kaiser seemed to grin. "Keep him under pressure!" the hunter roared, firing off another volley of arrows. "Don't let him get close!" Dragan weaved through the projectiles, his legs vanishing into aether and granting him flight. It wasn't just his legs. Many useless internal organs were recorded away for the time being, reducing his weight and granting him greater maneuverability. The amount of Dragan Hadrian that truly existed changed from second to second. The final arrow scraped past Dragan's face, leaving a thin cut. He clicked his tongue in displeasure, floating over the street. Even with Dragan's speed and flight, the hunter was quickly adapting. His face was familiar. Dragan had gone over every one of the contestants in this melee before arriving, and that information was quickly pulled out of his archive. Hazmith, no known surname, a famous big game hunter, specializing in deadly and unique beasts, gene tyrant leftovers and the like. Now he was aiming to become supreme, or more likely, aiming to hunt down other supreme hopefuls. Dragan flipped in the air, vanishing entirely into Gemini World for a moment as a hail of jigsaw pieces sliced through the air. He reappeared down in the gutter, already firing a series of Gemini shotguns upwards, annihilating quite a few of the pieces, but they were drops in the bucket. The jigsaw woman was called Mackenzie Mahar. Apparently, that unusual body of hers was the result of exposure to a dangerous aether armament in her youth. The pieces she disassembled into were sharp and strong enough to cut through steel. Dragan didn't want to risk direct contact. Right now, she disassembled her entire body, too, so there was no external user to take aim at. "Home, spirits," muttered a soft voice from the end of the street. I went to a Catholic Mass by force recently, so I'm going to try and adapt that. "Accept my apology, accept my reverence, accept my offered vengeance. Reach down into the ground and grasp the spine of holy retribution."
That's what we said.
Dragan narrowed his eyes. They talk like that. It's very dramatic. Victor Nezel, another former member of the Final Church, a gravekeeper who'd suddenly abandoned his post and made his way to the supremacy, entering the Dawn contest in a frenzy. A midlife crisis, maybe. Or something more? Dragan supposed it didn't matter. Plus, Victor was gravely mistaken if he thought he was in the middle of his life. Right now he had bigger concerns. The arrows Hazimuth was loosing and the jigsaws flying at him. Their assault was constant, keeping him on the defensive, preventing him from going after Victor, and the ability he was obviously setting up. Usually, projectiles like this would be no problem. He'd just record them in the Gemini shotgun and fire them right back. Only, Gemini shotgun wasn't working. These attacks were seemingly immune to it. Dragan understood when it came to the jigsaws. They were basically Mackenzie's body spread thin, and so he'd have to use Gemini Dominion if he wanted to capture them. Recording a few jigsaws at a time would be a waste of time and energy, but he could do it if he wanted to. The arrows, though, that made far less sense. Can't he not record it because it has their Aether on it?
Well, you can still do it with Aether projectiles you've been able to absorb in the past, things they've shot out with Aether.
They definitely weren't part of Hazimuth's body, and their paths were simple and easy to predict. There should have been no problem, and yet Gemini Shotgun failed to record them. Why? Inability? Under these circumstances, Dragan had little chance of figuring out the particulars. The important part was that he couldn't record them. He needed only move with that in mind. What an unlucky man Hazimuth was. He pushed himself right to the top of Dragan Hadrian's list. Hazimuth wouldn't be able to keep this up for long. He'd figured it out, watching this cogitant pursue the biker from a distance. The young man's abilities were all based on recording. He recorded his body to avoid attacks and move quickly through the battlefield. Watching that, Hazimuth had made a wager. If he could record himself, then surely he could record other things, couldn't he? So normal projectiles would most likely be useless. Only, in order to record something, you had to understand it, its structure, its nature, wrong itses.
Hazimuth didn't know, he's not gone to school.
That created an opening. Hazimuth could transfer the properties of his slain prey to his arrows, filling them with contradictory characteristics. An arrow with no legs that was simultaneously a corpse on 4 legs. Essentially an attack that could not be understood, could not be recorded. I thought they were doing something like that. I appreciate that. That's very fun. When he'd fired that arrow through the cogitant's palm, Hazimuth knew he'd found a weakness. It seemed the enemy had realized that as well. Hazimuth sniffed, and the electric tang of the cogitant's aether was coming from beneath him, beneath the ground. Immediately he leapt up onto the nearest building, narrowly avoiding the geyser of blue light that obliterated the street below. The enemy had 2 forms of ranged attack, from what Hazimuth had observed. Both involved returning objects he'd recorded at greater speeds. The first form. Well, here's one thing, right? Does the Gemini shotgun or railgun have to come from his hands? Because we've seen him, Aether move his hands around, so couldn't he also do that with where the projectiles launch?
Anywhere his Aether is, it can be the firing point, basically. Like, what he did when he fired from underground.
So his body's underground in Aether form, and that's why.
Well, just his Aether in general. It doesn't have to be his recorded body.
Right. And the electric tang of blah, 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 blah. Immediately he leapt up onto the nearest building, narrowly avoiding the geyser of blue light that obliterated the street below. The enemy had 2 forms of ranged attack, from what Hazimuth had observed. Both involved returning objects he'd recorded at greater speeds. The first form, the one the Kutchin had used in his initial bombardment, and that maneuver just now, was obscenely powerful. But the firing sequence took a few seconds, allowing for escape. Presumably allowing for, yeah. Make sure you edit, by the way, because I know there's some typos in this from what Lan said when we finished.
Yeah, I've been doing that, yeah.
Hell yeah. The second form, the one he was using the most, was weaker, but fired instantly. Weaker, of course, was relative. If Hazimuth suffered a direct hit, it would still be enough to kill him. The cogitant appeared next to Hazimuth as new perch in a flash of blue aether, immediately swinging his leg at the hunter's chest. Hazimuth immediately whipped out his machete from his side, deflecting the aether-infused limb and raining down sparks. He didn't have time to celebrate. Immediately, the sky. There's imminent. There's swiftly. There's a couple other adjectives we can work in there. He didn't have time to celebrate. Right away, Hazimuth ducked down, avoiding a shot from the cogitant's aether that surely would have decapitated him. Taking on the enemy in close range like this, Hazimuth could tell, his strength was mostly in his ranged attack. While he had a level of competence in martial arts, and his infusion boosted that further, close combat was by no means his forte. Just now, it hadn't been too difficult to block that attack. Hazimuth lunged in, swinging his machete at the cogitant's throat, the smile of the hunt spreading across his lips. It was short-lived. Gemini Dominion. There. As expected, the world around Hazimuth suddenly changed, the ruins of bone heaven replaced by the stark white of an unnatural plain. Surreal and absurd architecture stretched up into the sky above, while below yawned an empty void. This was not a place that could exist in the real world. Hazmeth held his machete up, vigilant for the attack he knew would come. That biker had surely been taken to this same place, and once here, beaten until he was unable to withstand those last few headbutts. Hazmeth couldn't blame his brief and fallen comrade. An ability like this was difficult to deal with if you weren't expecting it. It was only because Hazmeth had been taken inside second that he had the opportunity to defend himself. Power such as this, that transported the target to another world, mostly worked in one of two ways. Either an aether construct was erected around the target, entrapping them in a bubble of sorts, reality marble, or the target was recorded into aether themselves and then placed inside a simulated reality. This seemed to be the second. Hazmeth had once seen a man who could drag others into an otherworldly forest and drag that forest out into reality, but exceptions like that were thankfully rare. Sebastian reference?
Yeah.
Hell yes. The point was, this wasn't a real location. That didn't mean Hazmeth could take things easy, though. The biker had undoubtedly sustained injuries in this place, so whatever damage his simulated self suffered would be transferred to his real body when the ability ended. Hazmeth was sure that the same caveat didn't apply to the ability's user. If that was the case, he could do nothing more than defend himself and wait for the ability to end. Only, he really should have attacked by now. Hazmeth lowered his machete slightly and looked, listened, felt. There was no denying it. He was alone. Popcorn.
With each punch, Dragan smashed a jigsaw piece into a splatter of gore. With each kick, he shattered whatever bones remained within them. With each bite, he tore their skin to shreds. And still it wasn't enough. When he captured a target within Gemini Dominion, he didn't necessarily have to go in there with them. He'd captured Hazmeth and taken him out of play for a while, giving him time to focus on the jigsaw woman. Depending on the potency of his aether and how much he actively resisted, Hazmeth could be gone from anywhere from 30 seconds to 30 minutes. It would likely be on the shorter end of that scale, so Dragan couldn't waste time. He leapt through the air, twisting his body to avoid the flurry of flying jigsaws, wincing as their edges sliced at his skin. An ability like Gemini Dominion, recording an unwilling target like that, wasn't easy to pull off. Needless to say, there were conditions. In order to capture someone in Dominion, they needed to move either directly towards or away from him in a straight line for a distance of 2 meters. That was the basic activation requirements. After activating Gemini Dominion, Dragan had to immediately decide whether he went in there with the target or remained outside. He couldn't switch halfway through. Usually he would enter Dominion along with them to take out groups one by one, but in this case he didn't want to give them time to set up a trap in the real world.
Smart.
That was why he was here, weaving through jigsaws, risking death. So long as Gemini Dominion was active, Dragan couldn't use any other abilities in the outside world. No world, no shotgun, no railgun.
But he could use those if he had teleported inside.
Yeah, he can use, when he's in there, he has, a better version of world, because he is just literally teleporting around.
Gotcha.
All he had access to was basic aether usage. He'd make it work. Skidding on his heel, Dragan turned towards the building next to him, some sort of transport hub, once connected to a monorail that no longer existed. The jigsaws whizzed by, dangerously close, one getting lucky and slicing off Dragan's right ear. It dropped to the ground in a splatter of blood, but Dragan paid it no mind. After Dragan had finished off David Devine, Mackenzie had fully disassembled herself, clearly worried he'd go after next. It was a good move. Going after just a few of these jigsaw puzzles would be useless, but Dragan knew that was what she wanted him to think. With an ability like this, splitting herself into countless pieces, there had to be a drawback. For one, he assumed the individual pieces couldn't move too far away from each other. That's why they remained in a general cloud shape. Otherwise, she'd send some away from the fight just in case. Secondly, Mackenzie Maher was by no means an aether master. She'd used this unusual ability of hers to get far, but she herself was just about average. Her ability had to have a drawback. A core, perhaps? One of the pieces contained a consciousness, and destroying it would kill her? It seemed likely. All he needed to do then was identify that piece. Pinpoint aether, electric blue, flooded into Dragan's fist as he slammed it into the wall before him. The building exploded in a hail of rubble and dust. And at the very same instant, Dragan let out an aether ping. He contained it to the immediate area so he could defend himself quickly afterwards, but it was still more than enough to scan the cloud of jigsaw pieces. There. A single piece that, rather than lunging for the attack, hesitated a moment, faltered a moment, stopped a moment. Faced with that sudden display of strength, it hung back. It hung back because it knew that if it was destroyed, it was all over. Mackenzie Maher was a coward after all. To the untrained eye, Dragan's movements would have been nothing but a flash of blue. To the trained eye, it was much more absurd. In the moment before the rubble he'd sent flying hit the ground, Dragan kicked off. He leapt from chunk to falling chunk, each jump shattering the stone beneath him. He used a staircase that existed just for an instant, and before that instant was over, he was holding that fatal jigsaw piece between his hands. A panicked green eye stared at him from the surface of the jigsaw, pupil flicking this way and that in search of non-existent escape. The other Jigsaw's commanders one surged towards Dragan separately. He span through the air towards his back, ready to slice at flesh and bone the second they made contact. But it was too late. 2, said Dragan, and he tore the thing in half. Right after that, 4 things happened in very rapid succession.
I would honestly say I would keep the already off. I like, but it was too late.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I mean, do what you want. You're the author, but I like how you had it originally.
Yeah, no problem. Right after that, 4 things happened in very rapid succession. Victor Nezhel twisted the shovel he'd planted into the ground, a green smoke-like aether pouring forth from the hole. He opened his eyes, and there were 2 empty black pits. He smiled, and his teeth were dark as tar. Gravestones began to appear, protruding from walls, floors, and ceiling in a mass, like a sudden and morbid forest.
Is this his incomplete domain?
A chill went down Dragon's spine as the green smoke began to revolve around them. Whatever Victor had been cooking, it was ready. Blue aether flashed as Hasmoth reappeared, falling through the air. Even as he fell... Sorry, he aimed his bow right at Dragan even as he fell. Sorry, this is... that's, even as he fell, sorry. A hunter couldn't resist such prey. And finally, countless green and decrepit hands burst out of the ground around Dragan, grasping him tight and pulling him down. Scratch that. 5 things happened. Shit, said Dragan Hadrian.
Nice. Good chapter.
Thank you.
Let's see if there's anything in the Aetheral questions real fast.
And there was a question that I thought I could answer.
Let me see. You said there's a question you wanted to answer?
Yeah, it was about other crime families.
Where was that at?
I think it's like most recent one.
Here we are. Go for it.
What was the question again? Just the
other than the Oliphants, what other big crime families organizations are there?
Well, this is a little bit different from what you're asking, but basically there's a predecessor organization. There used to be a much larger organization that operated in the Final Church, Supremacy and UAP called Pandemonium. And the Oliphants used to be a part of that, basically. There were sort of 8 branches, sort of 8 kings of Pandemonium, and Abraham Oliphant was one of those kings. And when that organization collapsed, he went to the Supremacy and set up his own sort of operation, basically. And most of the modern crime families are either splinters of Pandemonium, or people who have now risen up to sort of fill in that power vacuum after the collapse.
Very, very nice.
And of course, there's the new crime family that's come in since the Oliphants have collapsed. So even like the collapses go further down.
It goes all the way to the bottom.
Providenza, yeah.
Providenza. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.